Apple unveiled the iPhone X yesterday and was met with intense enthusiasm and enormous media coverage. Why wouldn't we celebrate every new advance in the tiny devices that now totally dominate our lives? But not everybody is so excited, particularly those who know a lot about it. Jean Twenge is a psychology professor at San Diego State University. In a recent, widely read piece in The Atlantic, she argued that smartphones have created a mental health crisis for young Americans and devastated an entire generation. Her new book is called iGen, Why Today's Super-Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, all of which rings true if you've been around kids recently. Professor Twenge joins us now. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So let me just ask the macro question first, which is technology has completely reordered our lives from the most minor details to the biggest facts of our lives. And yet there's been almost no publicly available serious research on the effects of this technology on people. Why is it left to you to write this piece?
Well, there has been some research, but I agree with you that it has not gotten the attention that it's deserved. So I found with teens, for example, that those who spent more time on screens, say social media and texting, were less happy, more depressed, and actually had even more risk factors for suicide. And there's other studies that have found the same thing. There's a couple, for example, that followed people over time, found the more they used social media, the more unhappy they were. And unhappiness didn't lead to social media use, so it wasn't the other way around.
Well, I mean, that just seems like a really important fact. So I see the coverage of the iPhone, and I have one sitting on the desk right here, which I use a lot, too much. So I'm part of the problem, but I see the coverage and it's this breathless technology reporting, but I never hear anybody mention the obvious, which is the more you use this thing, the less happy you become. I mean, that seems like a salient point, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's really having an effect on young people. So I've done this work on generational differences for about 25 years. And around 2012, I started to see some really striking patterns in these very large national surveys that are done of teens. Their mental health started to really deteriorate right around that time. And 2012 is, of course, exactly when the percentage of Americans who owned a smartphone crossed 50%. And that's when teens' depression started to increase, suicide rates started to increase. They said they were more lonely, and it really has had an enormous impact on their lives.
It's remarkable. So the upside is, and you often hear this from parents, it's easier to communicate with your children. Smartphones have allowed Uber to flower, and that has reduced the amount of drunk driving that goes on. I think that's all real. The downsides, though, you say, include social isolation. What does that mean? It seems like kids are always talking to each other on the phone, but they're isolated?
Right, so they're talking to each other on the phone a lot. So lots and lots of electronic communication, about 6 to 8 hours a day on phones and screens for the average teen. But that's a lot of time, and so that has crowded out the time that teens used to do other things. So, for example, just hanging out with their friends, or going to parties, or going to the mall, or driving around in a car, anything that teens do face-to-face, that in-person social interaction, these iGen teens do it less than teens just 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So they're not hanging out with their friends as much in person, which we know is good for mental health, and instead they're communicating via screens.
That's just amazing. So if you grow up immersed in this, what's the likelihood you're going to be able to finish reading a 300-page book at some point?
Pretty low. And Sure enough, again, in these big surveys, that's exactly what you see. That if you look at, say, high school seniors, the percentage of them who say that they read books and magazines, even occasionally, has just plummeted. And that's what happens when they get to college. College faculty say they're not reading the textbook. They complain if I ask them to read anything longer than a few paragraphs, which, of course, that's what they're used to. They're used to things really changing every 10 seconds or so on the phone, and they don't have the attention span to sit and read a book or even a long magazine article.
Which has massive implications for our democracy. And again, when was the last time you read an even faintly critical piece about Apple? You know what I mean? They should be treated like Philip Morris, in my view. Professor, thank you for the important work that you're doing, popularizing the truth and saying things that nobody else is saying. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.